Alright, so I kind of have to do this quickly because I'm running out of space on my phone. Welcome weirdos, welcome to my channel. My name is EmmaAbe. I'm doing my wrap up for November. Got a little mug of hot chocolate that may or may not be spiced with something. You'll never know. All I will say is that I am of a legal age. This past month I read 10 books, so that's pretty good. And I participated in 2 readathons. That is the Nonfiction November readathon and the Indigathon. I like to participate in those every single year. I also went through finals, so that was hell. And I also got very distracted. I'll talk about my distractions a little bit towards the end because they do have to do with reading. First, let's just get this right off the bat. I read Tracy Kidder's Mountains Beyond Mountains, The Quest of Dr. Paul Farmer, a Man Who Would Cure the World. And this is essentially a biography of Paul Farmer, who is an anthropologist who did a lot of medical work. He's also a doctor, so he did a lot of work in like Haiti and some other countries. I had to read this for my applied anthropology class. Yes, we had to read the entire thing. That's why I read this one. I thought it was interesting. I wish we got to discuss it more. We were having issues with just kind of how things were changing towards the end of the semester and technical issues and just stuff changing with COVID, so we didn't get to talk about this as much as I would like to. I liked it a lot. I thought the story was very illuminating, and it's very interesting to talk about how you can make a difference as a person by showing you an example of Paul Farmer, but also explaining that you don't have to be Paul Farmer, because Paul Farmer's a little bit crazy. Like, he gets 4 hours of sleep every single night because he's just working so hard to make a difference in the world. It was very fitting for our class. This I read with audiobook and a little bit of reading with my eyeballs at the beginning because I didn't have the audiobook. So next book I read is The Pioneers, the heroic story of the settlers who brought the American ideal west by David McCullough. This wasn't my favorite David McCullough book. I didn't think it was objectively bad. I just think it's a little bit like a little bit glorifying like America. It is interesting to hear about settling the Ohio country, but it didn't like devote enough time, I think, to talking about the issues with like pushing Native people off. It just felt very much like glorifying of America's past and not as much of a dissection as I wanted it to be. And it also makes it seem like, you know, the West, it's really, really focused on the Ohio country and also very much focused on a certain part of Ohio. And it wasn't bad, it just wasn't what I was looking for. This one I read with audiobook. The next book I read is Lewis and Clark Through Indian Eyes. This I read for the Indigathon, edited by Alvin M. Josephy R. And this was really interesting because it is a collection of 9 different essays talking about Native American issues that were directly affected by like Lewis and Clark and taken into like a modern day lens. That was interesting. There was some like family history stuff in here. There was some like general overall like how can we not abuse Native people stuff in here. It was an interesting look, and I think like a necessary look. I was very pleasantly surprised to read N. Scott Nobaday's piece because that was towards the end and it wasn't like I wasn't expecting it because I didn't read the back cover. I took the sleeve off. Bear with me. Yeah, and it was fine. It was fine. I was just so everyone knows, I was very, very distracted this month and I was dealing with lots of depression. Next book I read is Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption by Brian Stevenson. I thought this would just talk about like one case, but I was very pleasantly surprised that it jumped around to a bunch of different cases. It's talked about their injustices and what Brian Stevenson did. Now that I've read it, it made me very curious as to how the movie handled it because you're following all these different narratives. But I don't know. If anyone knows how the movie compares to the book, let me know. And is the movie even worth like watching? This was at times like very hard to read. You're dealing with systematic issues and blatant racism. It can be hard to read. It was for me. I didn't need like a depressing book like this, which is why I was like avoiding reading it, but it was still a very good book and a very necessary book because of that. This I also read with audiobook. Next book I read is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, An Indian History of the American West by Dee Brown. I thought this would focus a lot more on Wounded Knee, and Wounded Knee is only like the last chapter. It talks a lot about the conflicts leading up to it, which was, it's a lot. There's a lot of names thrown at once. It would kind of be nice to have like a timeline. There is like at the beginning of every chapter kind of other big events that are happening of the time, which is nice to place it, but it still would be nice to have a timeline to see where we are in history in terms of the events themselves and not in terms of bigger things that were happening. And yeah, this is also a very depressing book to read. I agree with people when they say that it makes Indian history stops at Wounded Knee, and it doesn't. If you want a good book, I could pull it off my shelves, but I don't want it because I have to stand up to get it off my shelf. Read Heartbeat at Wounded Knee. Takes kind of where this ends and continues it. I'm glad I read this though. I read this with audiobook. Next book I read is A History of the Wife by Marilyn Yalom, and this one I was disappointed by. I was disappointed by because it wasn't what I was expecting. For some reason, I thought that it talked about Egyptian wives, but it doesn't. It is very Euro-American centric, and even within that, it's very like Western Europe. It did talk a little bit about LGBTQ issues. If you're interested in something like this, it's good. Just know that like it has that focus, and I for some reason went into this thinking it didn't have that focus. For what it was worth, like I did enjoy it. I did find that it was interesting. It was really interesting to see kind of like the Middle Ages and like the views on love and how that has changed. But again, I think I would have liked to see more all-encompassing, less Euro-American centric view of that. Because the whole time I was thinking, I was like, you know, in China, they have a very interesting history of like the wife, because not everything is monogamous there. Having courtesans is a point of pride for people. It's a status of wealth. Everything in here was very focused on like monogamy for the most part. I think it'd be interesting to look at like the history of like the wife in like Asian countries, and having more of that incorporated into this book I think would have made it better, but that's just me. I read this with my eyeballs. Next book is 1858, Abraham Lincoln, Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, and the War They Failed to See by Bruce Chadwick. This kind of talked about all of the tensions between North and South that were building and building and building and building, then ultimately led to the explosion that was the Civil War, which I'm glad there is a book that deals about this, because some people just think that it's Abraham Lincoln was elected and then the South got really pissed off, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it's way longer than that. Tensions had been brewing since before the founding of our country. One notable thing, I will say, it doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but while I was reading this, at the very beginning, when it's talking about Jefferson Davis, he married a woman named Varina, and I was just like, oh, you poor woman, your parents must have fucking hated you. For me, it's too close to vagina, and it's too close to Viagra for my liking. That's all I could think about for a hot second when reading this book, and I found it quite entertaining. But yeah, it kind of gives mini biographies of each of the people like mentioned and all of the major players. If you're looking for something like this, like, it's great. It does its job. I also read this with my eyeballs. The next book I read is Heartbeat Braves by Pamela Sanderson. For a while, like the first half of the book, I was just like, I am not into this. I'm just not into this. I just don't care. And then they finally got together and I was like, oh my god, finally. So for me, like the first half of the book was a little bit like of a drag. I will say though, I really appreciate the relationship between the woman in this and her grandfather. I think that was really cute and I really loved that and I really appreciated that. Yeah, and I thought like the main two, they were cute. It's just cute, you know. This book didn't like blow me away or anything, but it was cute. And I will say, like, once they got together, it became a lot easier and enjoyable for me to read. It's not like at the beginning, like they were like angsting for each other or like pining after each other. It was just like, I I have feelings for you and I'm going to repress them and crush them so I don't have to deal with them. And I didn't like that. Anyway, but otherwise than that, like it's a cute like native romance. And for what it is, it's cute. I read this with my eyeballs. The next book I read is Cahokia, Ancient America's Greatest City on the Mississippi by Timothy R. Paquette. I was expecting this to be very ethnographical, meaning just describing the culture of Cahokia, and it really wasn't that. It took a much more archaeological like view of it. So it's talking about the finds, all the archaeological finds, and that I found to be a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. And there's this one point in the book where they describe what it would be like going from like farming rural communities into the center of Cahokia. And that was really interesting for some reason. Talked a lot about the different influences that Cahokia could have had on different people and the just massive like trading network that Cahokia had. And yeah, Cahokia has just a very like special place in my heart and I love reading about it, and this is kind of what I wanted it to be. There you go. Cute. And I read this with audiobook. The very last book I read is There by Tommy Orange. This was a lot. It really was a lot. You follow a bunch of different characters who are going to a powwow for a variety of reasons. And that's all I really want to say about it. I don't think you need to know more. I think if you know more, it spoils it. It's very like plot light because there's just really like this one big event that happens, and those various characters being there all go into that event. The event that happens is set up from the very beginning, from chapter 1, but just going through it can be very triggering. It was difficult for me to read. I kind of had to like zone out a little bit. It was really good. I think Tommy Orange does a really good job about creating really distinct characters and bringing them to light in very subtle and vivid ways. This is probably one of like the books that I enjoyed like more out of all of the ones I read. So there you go. Those are all the books. I'm gonna be honest, I was a little bit disappointed with this reading month. Not that I thought any of these books were like really, really bad. None of them are. I just was so distracted, and I like still am to a certain extent, but I was just way more distracted and I was trying to deal with like finishing up. So reading became almost more of like a chore for me this month. I was very successful in reading most of the books that I set out to read. I was able to complete all but one, which I'm midway through reading now, and I think part of the reason that I wasn't enjoying these books is because like I was putting all of that pressure on myself to finish them. And also like at the beginning of November, I finished the drama The Untamed. Here be a picture of it. And that has thrown my life into a spiral of untamed everything. One of the things I've been very like distracted by is reading the actual book, Modal shit. I'm getting there. I'm still in the Yi City arc, and it's a tough arc to read. But also there's a wealth of fan fiction on the internet. So I've been reading a lot of fan fiction. It's not that like I haven't been reading. I've probably read like the most I've ever read in a single month this month because of the amount of fan fiction I read, because it's just constant. So if you want to know like what fan fiction I've been reading, like let me know. I'll make a video about it. I didn't want to put it in this video because it's just there's just so much given the lengths of fan fictions and like the amount and how quickly I'm going through them. So if you want like a untamed like fan fiction like rec video, like let me know and I will make it. That's it for me today. I want to go to sleep. Or, if I'm honest, I just want to go back to reading the Untamed fanfiction. Bye.